quiz time! Today we are going to build Mira's Gok-Do from the film K-Pop Demon Hunters. Hey, how's it going? A few months ago, we built Zoe's throwing knives, and we asked you guys which weapon you would like us to build next, and Mira's won by just a teensy bit. I am so excited for this build. Mira is my favorite character. Zoe has my heart, and Rumi is my BFF, but Mira and we're just kindred spirits. And her weapon is really cool. It is also massive. We are going from the smallest weapon in the lineup to the largest. Not at all scared. We're starting this build by focusing on the glowy pieces first, and then the handle will come later. And to craft the glowy pieces, we're going to follow almost the exact same method that we used for Zoe's throwing knives. First, sketch the weapon. Then we use that sketch as a template to sculpt one half of the blade and also the two extra glowy pieces on the handle out of clay. From there, we're going to mold those sculpts and then cast everything in resin twice. Now, So we already have our sketch. There aren't any official size comparisons or measurements that we could find, so we had to do a lot of guesstimating, and we got really into it. First, we tried comparing Zoe's knives to Mira's blade by stacking the knives lengthwise in the concept art, and then multiplying that number by the length of one of the knives. Since our knives are 7 inches long, that put Mira's blade at roughly 28 inches, which we then rounded up to 30. And to double check, we then compared the weapon to Mira's character model, and it looks like the blade spans from about her hip bone to the top of her head. And according to fan estimations, her height is around 5'6" to 5'7", which just so happens to be my height. So we measured that distance on me and got to around 30 to 32 inches. So we're just going with an even 30 for the length of the blade. But like I said, that is just the blade. The whole weapon is going to be around 8 feet tall. So with the sketch all finished, it is now time to begin sculpting these 3 to 4 pieces, and then we can get to molding and then resin. We lied. We are not going to be following the exact same method that we did to sculpt Zoe's blades. We have made quite a few discoveries. One of which being that we can't just sculpt one side of Mira's blade like we did with Zoe's, and that we will probably do with Rumi's, because those two are symmetrical. Mira's blade is not symmetrical. Our second discovery is we've decided to switch clay. We were going to use Sculpey. That's the same clay that we used for Zoe's blades. Actually, we used Super Sculpey. Sculpey would still work, but it would take a lot more time and money and painful hands. Mira's blade is so massive. We have 4 8-ounce packages of Sculpey here, and that's still not enough to cover one full side of the blade, let alone an entire other half of the blade, plus the 2 glowy bits that are on the handle. So we have decided to go back to our tried and true forbidden chocolate ice cream monster clay. This is the same clay that we used in our Junimo project. It is great. We already have a ton of it. It doesn't need to cure, and it's repurposable. We can make our one half of the blade, make a mold of it, take it all back, make the other half or the 2 glowy bits, and then melt it all back down into their containers and call it a day. So that is what we're going to do. So we're actually going to get to sculpting now. So our first clay sculpt is finished. 1/2 of Mira's blade. We have already constructed the walls for our mold box. Now it is time to mold it. We normally use Mold Max 14NV, but they didn't have it at the store. So we went with a sister variant of 14NV. Oh God. Mold Max 29NV, 50 pounds of part A right there. We went with the extra large variant because we're hoping that this amount will get us through all of the mold making for this project, hopefully for future projects as well. We'll see. 29NV is pretty similar to 14NV. It's just a little bit denser and it takes 2 extra hours to cure. So instead of 4 hours, it's now 6. And the reason why we normally go with 14NV is because we don't need a pressure chamber to squeeze out all the extra bubbles and gases that are in the silicone mixture. That's it. That's the only reason why. We are just going to mix up our silicone mold, pour it, demold it, repurpose the clay, make the other half of the blade and the 2 extra glowy bits, and then we will be done and we can move on to the rest of the blade. That's a lie. Well, sort of. We can move on to resin. In case anybody has any questions why this little rectangular lip is here, that's for hopefully later in the construction process when we attach it to the rest of the blade handle. Hopefully it will be hidden underneath the detail pieces that, you know, the little curvy pieces that grab onto the blade. So we are just going to mix up our mold max and make our first mold, and then we will check back in.
Do you want me to get it?
No, it's gonna take me to the floor with it.
That's
Good. Oh God, it's so heavy. Did it do it? I feel like I'm carrying a fish. Look at my catch. I went fishing today and this is what I got. And you like take a picture, you're like.
So while Erica is upstairs working on the rest of the clay sculpts, I'm gonna start building the skeletal structure of this weapon. This thing is long, really long, and once we start adding resin, it's gonna be really heavy. Usually in prop making, PVC is a really common choice for weapon handles, but because the blades are solid resin, we're worried that the PVC pipe would flex or warp over time. So instead, we're going with a metal pipe at its core and then building all the decorative elements on top of it. Inside the blade itself, we'll also be tying everything together with a steel flat bar so that the handle and the blade act as one continuous structure. The other big challenge is size. Fully assembled, this weapon is going to be over 8 feet long, which means we need a way to break it down for storage or travel, but without sacrificing on strength. To do that, I'm planning on using a sleeve joint with 3/4 inch and 1/2 inch EMT tubing, permanently fixing one side and hiding the removable joint behind a decorative piece of trim. We'll also need to integrate the electronics into the handle later on, the batteries, the wiring, the buttons, all of that. But first things first, let's see if we can get a solid skeleton built for this weapon.
Okay, we have made a ton of progress. Caleb has most of the weapon skeleton assembled until we move on to the electronics later on. Both halves are drilled and bolted. We are waiting to attach the flat bar until the resin blades are finished. And all the clay sculpts are done, all the silicone has cured, and we have mold max to spare.
A little bit.
Just a little bit. Now, are they perfect? Absolutely not. One blade half is deeper than the other, and the glowy bits are questionable at best. I tried my best to sculpt everything evenly and split everything cleanly down the middle, but they are definitely not perfect, especially these cylindrical glowy pieces. And that's okay. They should all hopefully still line up when we go to glue them together. If they don't, we will sand them until they do. And for the longest time, we couldn't even decide how we wanted to mold these cylindrical pieces. These cylindrical pieces causing a whole ton of issues. Because they have to be hollow in the center for the pole and all the electronics to go through. And we also knew we wanted them to be 2 halves so that we can just worry about the electronics and then pop them together. It just gives us more control over them. At first we thought we would just pour resin into these molds and then route a channel for the pole afterwards. And then we thought, oh, what if we do a 2-part mold like we did for our Junimo star up there, where we make one half of the mold and then we make another half of the mold that has the channel for the pole already in there, and then we pour resin through that and it just goes like around, you know, this motion. But then after much deliberation and 0 left, we just said screw it, and we're just going to put extra pole pieces into the molds that we have and put some ease release on those steel bars so the resin doesn't adhere to them, and just pour the resin in and hope for the best. Because like I said, I can't be anymore to worry about these cylindrical pieces. These cylindrical pieces have been more stressful than the blades, and the blades are the star of the show. And we're moving on. It's resin time. We are going to follow the same method that we did for Zoe's blades, where we first dust the molds with blues and purples and pink mica powders, and then we are going to mix up our secret formula with Smooth Cast 326 polyurethane resin. Then we will pour everything. Hopefully it all works out. We do have to adjust the amounts of our secret formula to accommodate these much larger pieces. We are going from a petite 4 ounces of resin per one of Zoe's blades to a juicy 40 ounces of resin for Mira's blade, not including the cylindrical pieces, which bring us to a total of about 60 ounces of resin for all of Mira's glowy bits. That sounds weird.
That does sound weird now. All of Mira's glowy bits.
For all of the glowy bits on Mira's weapon. Hopefully everything turns out well. So we are going to get to pouring, and then we will check back in. All of the resin is finished. They look amazing. I am so happy with how they look, especially the blades. And I am feeling a lot more confident in this build than I was at the beginning of the video. It's tough because we envision and imagine how we want these projects to look, and they look so cool in our heads, but we don't actually know how they're going to turn out or if they're even plausible. The beginnings of our projects are really all built on desperate hope and an unsteady amount of confidence. But now that the resin is done, I am able to start seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and really seeing maybe how the weapon is going to turn out, and I'm very excited. And we were able to nail all of the resin pours on the first try, except for the cylindrical pieces. We did do those twice because the first batch, the two halves wouldn't meet. I don't know if maybe the pole just wasn't sitting low enough for the resin to come up. There were large gaps in between the two halves. So we did do those pours again, and we just strapped down the poles so that they sat lower, and it worked out. And we managed to get the blades pretty thin this time around. I remember with Zoe's blades, hers turned out a bit thicker than their movie counterparts, which is fine. Those are made out of magic and I can't compete with magic. But with Mira's blades and going into roomies, those blades are so much larger and require so much more resin that we really want to make sure that they're thinner so that they don't end up warping or weighing down over time. I think we succeeded. They are very thin, almost too thin, teensy bit flimsy. Specifically this one, I think this one's thinner. You can see it kind of bends a little bit. Hopefully though, when we glue the two halves together, they will fortify each other and they look really good. And I am incredibly surprised I managed to sculpt this thing twice and they look remotely like each other. They all still need cleanup and sanding and gluing, but that comes later. First, we have to make everything glow and still decorate the pole itself. But before we get to final assembly, we have to tackle the electronics. Caleb has been very excited about this part. So
for the electronics, we want all of the resin pieces, the blade, and the two cylindrical pieces to light up. We're using the same LEDs from Zoe's blades, these little noodles LED filaments, but instead of one, we're gonna need a lot more to make Mira's weapon glow. I found this tiny little driver board that is specifically meant to power these LED filaments so that I don't have to use a resistor like I did in the last one. We'll hide at least one driver in the pole for each glowing section, and they'll power however many filaments we need to light up this massive polearm. And to power everything, the largest battery I could physically shove inside the pole. It barely fits. I couldn't really find a battery holder to fit this build, so I also want to design and 3D print a custom part to keep everything secure. But first, we need to lay out the filaments and see how many we actually need. So we just finished soldering 11 LED filaments for the blade, and we ran into a couple of challenges that we wanted to share real quick and the new plan going forward. Originally, the plan was to mix these long and short LED filaments along the front and back edges of the blade. But once we powered them on, it didn't look like how we'd hoped. We got a nice outline of the blade, but the entire center section stayed dark, and the longer filaments would get dimmer towards the end, which made the brightness across the blade really uneven. So we panicked and and started testing other LEDs. We tried stronger LEDs, a double-sided strip, a side-lit strip, and even this really cool super wide strip. But each one came with their own problems. The double-sided strip was too thick and created visible hot spots through the resin. The side-lit strip didn't spread the light far enough across the blade, and the super wide strip was both too thick and too difficult to shape along the curve. So after all of that testing, we ended up going back to our original plan of using the LED filaments, but with a few changes. First, we got rid of the longer filaments and doubled up on the shorter ones to hopefully fix the uneven brightness. And to solve the dark center section, the answer was simply more filaments. A lot more filaments. After testing how many we needed, we decided to add 16 more, bringing our total to 27 LED filaments for the blade. Now for the cylindrical sections of the polearm, we might still actually use that super wide LED strip. These pieces are thicker than the blade, so it should provide a nice even glow and hopefully illuminate them better than the LED filaments. So with all the testing out of the way, let's get back to soldering and finishing up the electronics. Oh, and I haven't forgotten, we still have to find a way to power all of these LEDs. We'll get to that. Batteries.
We got a lot done. We dremeled all of the channels and glued in the LED filaments for the blade half. We did something else. Oh, and we routed out space for the metal rod to go in later when we assemble everything together. That part went according to plan. After that, everything kind of descended into chaos. First things first, we have new cylindrical pieces. They might just look the same to you guys, but they are different. Here are the old cylindrical pieces, not the OG cylindrical pieces, which are these. These look great, and I am very proud of how they turned out, even though they were a pain in the booty and not at all symmetrical. The reason we have new cylindrical pieces is because the originals, these and these included, did not end up fitting on the pole with the LED strip in place. Originally, we were going to dremel channels into the resin and run LED filaments through them, just like with the blade. We even already dremeled the channels in place and everything. But once we finished the blade, we realized that these cylindrical pieces and the little ones would require way more LED filaments than the original 4 that we planned on. So we switched to the LED strip, completely ignoring the fact that it is significantly thicker. The proper fix would have been to sand out the insides of these pieces to make room, but we didn't really know how to do that in a closed chasm like this. And we tried to wrap some pole pieces in tape to simulate the extra girth and then pour the cylinders again, and that still didn't work. So instead of trying again and again and potentially wasting more resin, Caleb redesigned them in Blender based off of my sketch and the original pieces, and accounting for the LED strip thickness and the pole. And we 3D printed these test pieces to make sure everything fit before we cast them in resin. And it worked! These are the pieces that we're going to represent the final cylindrical pieces that we were going to pour out of polyurethane resin. This piece is what we used to make a mold out of, and then this piece is what we put in the mold when we poured the resin to represent the pole in the LED strip. Which is funny because we originally had this idea way back in the very beginning of this project, right after we made these out of clay. Roll the footage. Honestly, these cylindrical pieces probably could have been 3D printed. Modeling these geometric pieces in Blender and then 3D printing clean masters would have allowed us to get perfectly symmetrical pieces that we could split evenly. Probably would have saved us time. Also, you might be thinking, okay, so you 3D printed those parts. Why are there like 50 other 3D printed parts on the table? Well, that is because originally, from the very beginning, I was planning on sculpting all of the detail pieces on the weapon with aluminum foil and epoxy sculpt, and only 3D printing any of the pieces that needed to be removable for when we disassemble the weapon. This joint piece, oh, and the end piece for accessing the electronics. However, sculpting this piece in Blender and 3D printing it turned out to be a lot of fun. So we tried it on a few more pieces and eventually just scrapped our original plan entirely. Well, sort of. Now, we're 3D printing all of the major decorative parts on the blade. After everything is glued together, I'm going to go in at the end with epoxy sculpt, finish up some of the final decorative spots, like this wiggly part, you know. And this is the most 3D printing that we have done for any project, and I regret nothing. I got to learn some Blender. Caleb is the 3D modeler of the two of us. He, fun fact, has a degree in 3D modeling. He would set up the Blender file and set up all the base shapes and then hand it over to me to play around with the curves, not unlike a parent setting up a project for a toddler. And honestly, it was really simple and a lot of fun. And it saved us a ton of time. And yes, you may be thinking, guys, you have spent 3 months on this project. Why are you suddenly worried about time? But we've been worried about time the entire time. And on top of all of that, Caleb has been refining what we're calling the battery sled. It's in 3 pieces right now because our printer is small. This will slide into the bottom of the pole and house all of the batteries and boards and electronics that are going to power this weapon, and everything will be wired to it. And then I think we're ready for final assembly. Compiling all the electronics, mounting everything to the pole, gluing, bolting, epoxy sculpt, priming, painting, and then we're done. Yeah, so we are going to get back to everything. Sorry, this video has been sort of all over the place. This project has really taken us on a wild ride. And then we'll check back in, maybe. So let's just get to it. Mira's weapon is complete, and I can't believe it's done. It looks so good. This has been our biggest project we've ever done in every sense of the word. Physically, mentally, emotionally. I'm really proud of how the blade came out, especially considering they were hand carved as two separate halves. And I'm really proud of Caleb. He soldered and connected like 50 LEDs for this thing and then managed to shove all the electronics up into this 3/4 inch tube, which is really cool. And the gold paint and all of it, it's just really cool to see it all come together the way it did. To be completely honest, we spent a majority of this project focused on all the things that have gone wrong. I could make a list, a long list of things that I would want to change or things that just didn't go right or that I'm not happy with, but I don't want to do that. Somewhere along our creative journeys, probably ironically in art school, the standards that we put upon ourselves and our work became so monumentally high that art was no longer fun. Art had to showcase our best qualities and strengths only. Thankfully, we're not in that period of unhappy anymore. We love creating both in our personal lives and on the channel, but sometimes those unrealistically high standards still creep back in. There was a time when I wouldn't have even thought twice about these imperfections. I would have thought they were quirky and cute and happy little accidents. I still would have learned from them, but I wouldn't have let them get me down. And I do feel that way about these imperfections now, but it took me a little bit to get back to that mindset. All this to say, art is supposed to be fun, even when it's imperfect. The imperfections are a part of what makes it yours. They tell a story. I really am proud of this project. We accomplished what we set out to do. And along the way, the build evolved in ways we couldn't control, or maybe could control, but didn't. And in the end, it looks amazing. Thank you so much for joining us and for your patience. We don't mean to disappear for months on end while we work on our projects. We just really suck at multitasking, but we're trying to get better at it. And a huge thank you to our patrons. Your support and encouragement means the world to us and helps us to keep going and continue making these projects. And if you would like to check out our Patreon, link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking or subscribing and leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought. And if you have any tips or tricks for weapon design or prop making, please let us know. We only have one more weapon next, and that is Rumi's, and we are very excited to finish this trilogy. Thank you again for watching. Now, let's have a look at the final results, and we'll see you next time. Bye.